Welcome everybody. This is Markus Vähälä coming from Citizen Network from Kukunori from Helsinki, Finland. You are watching No Labels, No Walls Action Monday. And today the title is On Storytelling with Scott. Welcome everybody all over the world through CNTV, from YouTube, from Facebook, on your favorite platforms. Welcome. And today's host is Cindy. Welcome, Cindy. Are you ready to rock and roll? How are you doing?
Hi, I'm surprised.
No problem, I can do it with you.
Okay, so everybody can introduce themselves really quickly. 2 or 3 minutes about yourself. I'm Cindy, I'm in Finland. But behind me is Maine, the coast of Maine where I'm from. So I see Scott here, Scott McArthur. You can go first.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi there, I'm Scott. I'm the speaker tonight, so I'll be talking to you about storytelling.
Okay, this was a surprise to me, so I didn't know that.
No, it's fine. I am very, very relaxed. I'll tell you later why nothing surprises me anymore, Cindy, okay. So don't worry.
Okay, thanks.
My name's Scott McArthur. I'm obviously, you all have funny accents. I don't, I'm from Scotland.
Right.
And I live in an area of England called the Cotswolds, so I'm about 20 minutes from Oxford.
Okay.
Nice to meet you all.
Okay, looking forward to hearing more from you later.
So am I. So am I. If I can remember what I'm going to talk about, I'm looking forward to it as well.
Okay. Michael, wake up.
I'm Michael. I'm from Los Angeles, from Sternberg Laboratory.
Thank you. And Mary, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm Mary from Los Angeles, Sternberg Laboratory. Great to be here, and I'm really looking forward to finding out about the storytelling. Good to see you all.
Me too. And Keith.
Hi everyone, I am Keith. I live in a strange place called Keithland, but I've swapped over with Scott, so I'm actually living here in Glasgow.
Okay. And Kevin from Connecticut. Kevin?
Hello, hi, can you hear me okay? Yes, Kevin from Connecticut, musical intervention. And aside from music, I always looked forward to my English classes in university and high school or college. But yeah, I'm looking forward to this storytelling presentation today. Thank you for being here.
Sounds cool. Okay, Layla. You're muted.
Sorry. Hi, my name's Layla. I'm calling from Dover in southeast Kent of UK.
Welcome. And Ewan. You're muted.
Unmute yourself. Hello.
Yeah, I've done it now.
Oh.
Hello, everyone. I feel like the world's going insane, but hopefully I'll get some normality in the next hour. I live in Aberdeen, the UK as well. Okay, nice to meet you all. Hello, everyone.
Thank you. And Alistair.
Hello, I'm Alistair, also up in Aberdeen. Yes, just looking forward to hearing a bit more about this storytelling.
And somebody called SSS.
That might be Silent Suki, so she's just listening.
Okay, welcome Suki. And Mark.
Hello, Mark. Mark, unmute yourself. Mark? Hello? Unmute yourself.
Yes,
Oh, hello.
I'm on an iPad today because the computer's not working.
Okay. All right, welcome then. And Naomi.
Hello, I'm Naomi. I'm calling from Chatham. Kent.
Okay, welcome.
And it's snowing here.
Okay. And Lasse. Lasse sitting in the dark.
And now I put my camera on and I hope it works. Well, I'm Lasse from Helsinki, Finland, and I have been somewhat busy past weeks, but I'm an old co-worker with Markus and have been in this movement a couple of years now. And storytelling really sounds interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm middle of my snack, so I'll put my camera off.
I was too before Marcus interrupted me. But anyway, who's next? Riika.
Hello, everyone. I'm Riikka. I live in Helsinki, Finland. Nice to meet you all. First time here, but so happy to hear more about storytelling.
Welcome. And unless there's somebody hiding, I think that's everybody. So shall we introduce Scott again for realsy?
Yes, thank you, Cindy, for stepping in as host of No Labels, No Walls. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And
my pleasure.
Next, Scott McArthur on storytelling. Welcome, Scott. We are so glad to have you here with us tonight.
There we are. I'm working now, Marcus. How are you doing? Good to be here.
Welcome.
Yeah. It's been an interesting day for me, as Marcus knows, because my internet collapsed this morning, and I've got a fiber network. It completely collapsed. I was running a conference today with 300 people dialing in from all over the world and 5 speakers. So I've not had a good day. So I'm on my iPhone rather than my proper studio camera. So apologies for that. I hope everyone can see and hear me okay. So Marcus has asked me to talk a little bit about my own journey into storytelling and what I do now. So it's good to hear some Scottish accents, guys. I don't get to hear many Scottish accents. So my brother lives just north of Aberdeen. He runs one of the shortbread factories. So it's quite nice having Aberdonians in the room, or at least people in Aberdeen, which is nice. And it's also nice to hear someone in Glasgow. I think Glasgow's a bit crazy just now, given what happened at the weekend with the football. But so it's nice. It's nice to meet you all, and it's lovely to meet people from all over the world at the same time. So I'm going to start at the beginning because I think it's worth. There's a reason for that. Because I started my career after university. I went on to study at Edinburgh University for my post-degree work, and I did work with microscopes, and I worked with brains and all sorts of stuff, and I did about 150 autopsies. So I can take a knee joint out in about 30 seconds, folks, so don't cross me. I did that, and I enjoyed that for 3 years. But at the end of the 3 years, I found myself living in a squat in Edinburgh. It's a horrible place, and I couldn't afford to continue being a scientist anymore. So I decided to get out and get into the corporate world. So I just jumped into. Someone's asking me, will I take their knee joint out? Yes, of course. I've still got my dissection kit, so I could manage it. So I decided, well, the one thing that I could market into the corporate world was the fact that I was numerate. And I joined one of the British utility companies. It was a company called British Gas at the time. And I joined their human resources department as the data monkey, I guess, the guy who does all the what they used to call manpower planning, which they now call human resource planning. So my best line is I went from human remains to human resources, and it was quite a leap. But the skills that I got from the laboratories really helped me there, and I very quickly rose up through the ranks and eventually becoming an HR director about five years later. And I ended up running HR for about 6 or 7 companies across the UK and in Europe. At the end of that period, and this is where things start to get, I think, a bit more interesting, I decided I'd had enough of working in HR, and I'm happy to talk about that later if you want to know why, but I thought I'd come out. And I joined one of the big 5 consulting companies. I joined a company called KPMG. And they asked me to head up their what they call people and change practice, which is it's just a way of, it's basically HR but linked to technology. So for the ensuing 10 years, I worked on 3 Olympic Games. I'm very proud of the one in London because we won that because of storytelling, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. We won the one in Beijing because of storytelling. So it was very a powerful part of that 10 years that I spent with KPMG, and then the French company Atos, who purchased KPMG halfway through my time there. Then about 10 years ago, just about 10 years ago, I decided that I would come out of the corporate world and take my passions and my interests into the public speaking domain. And I've spent the last 10 years doing that. I'm now a professional keynote speaker, and I go around the world, at least I did go around the world, speaking at conferences everywhere. I've been everywhere, literally everywhere. So it's been a terrific journey, but that takes us quite nicely to storytelling. I wasn't brought up as a storyteller, I was a scientist. And I was a typical scientist. I did biology, I did psychology, a little bit of mathematics, and then I went into science. And I joined the academic world without really understanding how it worked. But very quickly, I started to see that there was an opportunity, because scientists are not good at communicating. And I know that's a general statement, but they're not. I work with scientific research teams all the time, and they are pretty awful at it. I'll tell you how you can see one in action tomorrow if you're interested, because I'm actually working with the head of the Cambridge University neuropsychology department tomorrow. So, and you were going to chat about how difficult he finds it to communicate what he does. And he leads a team of 20 PhDs working in neuroscience, and he's really struggling with it. So you can tune in tomorrow if you want to hear it live. But I started to realize that there was a gap in the market, and I started to read some of the names you may have heard of, like Carl Sagan or Oliver Sacks, or some of the great scientists who actually, against the odds, were fantastic communicators. And it was odd because particularly someone like Sagan, who, if you've never heard of Carl Sagan, he was him and his partner were responsible for the gold disc on one of the great satellites that we sent out. You might have heard of it. They sent it out with all the different languages and songs out to space on the Voyager, one of the Voyager spacecraft. That was him, and his partner Adrian, who is another terrific person. She's a great storyteller. But he inspired me, and I became, in that world, I became this. I was communicating things about as diverse as explaining how Alzheimer's works to. I had a pretty difficult one. I was involved in the Lockerbie disaster, which I don't know if you've heard of the Lockerbie disaster, but it was a big deal globally. It was a huge deal in Scotland at the time, and this was 10 years after it, and we were still trying to work out what happened in the sky, and I had a role in that as well. And eventually, one of my other projects was I ended up working with some of the oldest medical instruments in the world that were found just outside Edinburgh in a place called Sutra Bank. So I did a lot of work with trying to engage the public with these quite complex subjects, and it went reasonably well. I quite enjoyed that. And that, I think, set me up for my time in the consulting world, because I very quickly realized that certainly at KPMG, and now I know everywhere else, they were absolutely awful at telling stories. And this is the first thing I would suggest that you think about. Now I think it's wise, but you can tell me what you think. But my experience is that facts tell, but it's stories that sell. Facts tell, stories sell. And that came to me really just before the Beijing Olympics, because we were a huge company with huge resources, but we were up against you know, other countries who were helping other countries pitch for the games. And I was quite junior at the time. I was probably like a middle manager type level. And I was pushing them to talk more about regeneration and about how we could help the average person living in, you know, near what they called the Bird's Nest, which is the famous stadium that they built for the Beijing Games. But then I wasn't successful because I wasn't senior enough. But then when I went on to work in the London Games, there's a question from now. Is that the way? How do we run it? I just stop when you've got questions. I'm quite happy to do that. On you go, Naomi. Ask me a question. I love questions. Somebody might have to unmute her. I don't know how it works.
Okay, the question is that how do you make the story stick?
Let me come on to that, Naomi. Don't let me forget, but I promise I'll come on to that. I promise I'll come on to that. I'll give you an example. I'll go beyond. I'll actually tell you a story to show you how to make stories stick. But then when we got to the London Games, I was then a senior. I was running a part of the KPMG consulting business. And I was adamant that we should use stories to sell the fact that London should be the place for the games. And we spent 3 years designing a whole suite of stories that won us the games. Without any doubt, they won us the games. And there's a fundamental principle there that, and I'm going to tell you a story just to demonstrate it, but there's a fundamental principle in any effective storytelling. It doesn't matter if you're telling a personal story or a corporate story. This is a key thing, but let me tell you a story and see how you respond to it. About 12 years ago, more than that, 14 years ago, I went through a very good divorce. My ex-wife and I are very good friends. It wasn't one of these divorces where you hate one another. But we went through a good divorce. It was my fault because I was traveling around the world and I was away from home all the time. There was no one else involved, but we just drifted apart. And that was awful. But she's still one of my best friends to this day. But it was awful because we had 2 quite young children at the time. And my daughter, Anna, was 6 when we divorced. And it was very, very difficult because her and I were extremely close. And my ex-wife and I sat down one day and said, look, how are we going to make this work? Because of work, I had to move to London and they were living sort of halfway up England in a place called Cheshire, near Manchester. And I thought, well, I'm going to have to go and see them as often as I can. And I couldn't live nearby because of work. So I decided, with my partner's help, I would see them every week or every 2 weeks. And I went up every 2 weeks to see them. But every time I visited, I would crawl up to her bedroom and I would write little post-it notes just saying, Daddy loves you, I miss you, I'll see you next week, whatever, you know, be good for mummy, you know, blah, 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 be good at school, try hard. Very, very obvious little messages to one's daughter. But what I did was I hid them. So I would put them under her pillow or behind a door or in a book, whatever. So she had to find the stories. And I had no idea if it was working because she didn't really mention them to me. But about 3 years later, Julie was having a big birthday and I went up for the party and we were sitting at the kitchen table having a glass of wine and she said, I have to show you something, Scott. So she took me upstairs and my daughter Anna has a little bedroom. She took me in and she opened the cupboard. It was like a wardrobe. And as she opened the cupboard, all these post-its were stuck on the inside of the cupboard, right? Now, unless you're an alien or you hate children, that will have hit you with something which is about your emotions. And the basis, now that is not a corporate story, that's obviously a personal story, but that type of story is how you create something, and this is the key thing. You create something called empathy by telling stories. And for me, it's, I mean, empathy, we can have a dialogue about what you think empathy means, or what I think it means doesn't really matter. But empathy is something that basically it's about understanding other people's experiencing, what their lives are, how they're experiencing their life. And I think from my experience that empathy, sorry, someone's asked a question. Empathy is, well, there's lots of different definitions of empathy, which is partly the problem here, but it's seeing the world through other people's experiences. That's how I like to define it. There are academic debates about empathy versus sympathy. I'm not interested in those debates. I'm interested in trying to understand how other people are experiencing the world, because if you can do that, you can go closer to them. And there's a little, well, you can't see him. Look, there's a little spaceman. Is that little spaceman? See him? Yeah, have you got idea? You ever heard of the movie Interstellar? Any of you heard of that movie? Yeah, there's hands going up. That's good. It's a great movie, and in the movie, there's a part of it. One of the bad guy who's on one of the planets. If you've never seen this film, it's terrific, beautifully written. Goes a bit David Bowie at the end, but apart from that, it's a very, very good movie. But one part in the story, there's a dialogue between two of the major protagonists, and the fellow who ends up being the baddie says this. He says, "Empathy rarely extends beyond our line of sight." Empathy rarely extends beyond our line of sight. And I'm slightly changing that, but that's basically what it says. And for me, that's why storytelling is so important, because if you tell a story, it can go further than your line of sight. So for example, on my YouTube channel, I do all this storytelling on there, and people come at it from all over the world. And it doesn't matter if their English is their first language, or if they can struggle to hear my cope with my English or my accent, they get the nub of the story. And whether I'm talking about performance management, human capital, business performance, whatever I'm talking about, I use stories to describe it every single time. And that stood me in very good stead in the consulting world, because very, very few people tell stories in that environment. And it's even funnier than that. If you look, and one of my academic friends looked at MBA programs across the world, and less than 5% of them teach people how to tell stories. So for me, it's low-hanging fruit. It's low-hanging fruit. It's obvious, but people are either scared to do it or don't think they can do it. I think everybody can do it. We've all had these lived experiences. And this is where I would like you to have a think about yourself, because what I also believe, I'm a bit of an Indiana Jones fan. See my hat? I won't put it on because I've got the headphones on, but I think being an archaeologist of your own life is a very, very good starting point for storytelling. And probably 6 or 7 years ago, I started to really take that seriously. And I've now got over 400 stories from my life that when I'm ever asked to speak, and it doesn't matter if it's at Google or if it's at a hospital, it doesn't matter. I sit down and I work out, there's the goal, I call it the golden thread. What am I trying to communicate? And then I plot my stories against that thread, and I tell those stories to people, from my background, to get to the point that they want me to get to. And I have spoken, there isn't really a company I've spoken at, all the big guys like Apple and Google and Amazon. They take it just as seriously as companies that you might think would be more open to it, like academia. So I think it's a very powerful process. There are lots of methodologies out there. I'm not going to bore you with any of them just now, but I fundamentally believe it's about finding things in your own life, being confident in telling people what those stories are and sharing them. And for me, the evidence is, well, there's no doubt about it, that it can be a really powerful thing. So a story can act as an empathy engine. It can help others see that your life, how you're experiencing it, but if they're telling their stories, you get to experience how they're experiencing it. And it's really important that that's the one takeaway I really would like you to have, is stories act as an empathy engine. And like any engine, you've got to maintain it, oil it, put fuel in it, and there's got to be a driver, and you're the driver. you're the driver. So that, for me, that's obviously an introduction to storytelling. But the other thing, someone in the comments said, you know, how do you make them stick? One of the things that came to me it was just prior to the UK's first lockdown. I was working with a lot of journalists. I was working with journalists are good writers. They're not necessarily good storytellers. But nevertheless, I was working with a few of those, and I told a story about that elephant there, and I realised that artifacts can be a really good way of helping people remember your stories. So what I do now, I call this my artifact wall behind me, and every single thing on this wall has a story behind it. And if I can tilt it a little bit, like see up there, there's a whole load more artifacts. And what I will do is, depending on who I'm speaking to, I will change the artifacts behind me so that I can then, and the great thing is, if you tell your own stories, you don't have to remember anything because you know your own stories. Now you need to practice them, but you don't need to remember anything because you just repeat your own stories. So if it's a bottle of poison there, I'm talking about performance indicators. If it's this thing here, I'm talking about the importance of time, etc., etc. So artifacts for me are a really good way of helping you remember the stories that you got to tell. I've done a couple of TEDx talks, and in both of those talks, I used artifacts. I had a brain in one, and I had something else in the other. You know, it helps you remember, it grounds you. And if you're a lot of people, most people are quite nervous about speaking in public. But if you tell your own stories and you use an artifact to help you remember your own story, it's very difficult to forget the story, because if you're nervous and you're thinking, I've got to remember to talk about the 7 points, and people turning around using bloody PowerPoint. You know, I mean, I haven't touched PowerPoint for 12 years. Do not need PowerPoint. I cannot think of a circumstance when I would need it, because it makes what I call sliduments. It's actually document. It's not a presentation. It's not for presenting at all. And professional speakers very, very rarely use PowerPoint. They tend to use stories, or they tend to use artifacts. Occasionally you use a picture, of course, but we tend to use an artistic picture rather than a picture that's from a Photoshop thing, or it's terrible things. They don't work. Well, they can work, but they're not as good as a proper story supposed to be a proper artifact. So that's certainly how I would make things stick. I use artifacts, but I've not seen a lot of people doing this, but it does really, really work. The other thing that's quite interesting at the moment, and I know we're all in this weird world at the moment using technology, I've found making films has been a very powerful way of telling stories that stick. And I challenged myself 10 months ago when my business collapsed. I lost, a fortune in 3 hours. And I thought, well, I can't not work for the next 10 months. So I taught myself how to do video editing. And that has been one of the best things I've ever done. I'm not suggesting you should do that, but again, it helps me tell my stories through my videos. Because when if you can do basic video editing, you can add huge amount of value to a piece of work. And I know I've seen some of the work that Marcus has done. It's fantastic. And that proves the point, doesn't it? It's just fantastic how powerful it is. The tourism video, for example, is a fantastic example of that. So little things like that I've found I've really added to my ability to get stories across. So I'm going to shush because I'm worried about my technology going off, Marcus. It's definitely fluctuating. I hope you can still see me. But maybe if I answer some questions, I can obviously go back and tell more stories, but maybe I should answer some questions before I do that. Does that make sense, Marcus? What do you think?
Yes, thank you, Scott. Now it's your time to comment and make questions. You can also put those questions there on the chat, and I can then read them for you, Scott.
Yeah, I can't see the chat.
Yes, no problem.
Okay? Right, okay. I'm not used to using this platform, sorry.
So Keith here has a comment. Often I can use a different cuddly toy from mine and my children's life to make a point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is one thing I would say on that. Be careful that you don't overuse some of these things, because there are it depends on your audience. You've got to think about your audience. But if you tell, I call them sad stories. If you tell like, my daughter's story, I don't tell that very often because it upsets people quite often, if particularly if there's a lot of people in the room. So you have to pick your time to use it. But yeah, teddy bear, anything. It doesn't need to be soft and cuddly either. It can be a pen. You know, when I tell that story about my daughter, I often just hold up a post-it and say, I'm going to tell you a story about post-its. You know, so yeah, but that's a great example. Thank you for sharing it. Thank you.
Then there's a question from Naomi. Does the story have to work inside and out?
Are you talking about psychologically and outside the psyche? You need to clarify that question. Don't understand it.
Naomi, would you like to continue from here? Naomi comes back soon. So
Okay.
I had a very good experience with you, so of using a space as an artifact. So I was at the Propeller Heads experimental laboratory, and with my funny hat on, and I walked around and told stories about the space, but eventually it led to history, for example, what has happened and where we are going. And actually this No Labels, No Walls community also was formed partly there. So that's also the laboratory is the starting
I thought
point
that
all
worked
of
really
this.
well, Marcus. I thought it was an excellent example of. I think there's another thing. I mean, I'm not into the sort of woo-woo law of attraction type stuff, but there was a weird thing happened to me 2 weeks ago. I said earlier, I think we should all be archaeologists of our own life. We should all, you know, record your own stories. And I got a bizarre email from a lady in Brooklyn who, during the Second World War, her grandmother had looked after Scottish sailors who had been going across the Atlantic during in the 40s, protecting the fleet with the sort of food and supplies going between America and United Kingdom. And it turns out my grandfather, had actually lived with this woman 6 times. So he had gone across, you know, 12 times between America and the United Kingdom. But the really weird thing was she had a book and she called it the Book of Memories. And of course, I've been telling people they should have a book of memories. It was one of these, I mean, spooky synchronicity type things. And I've now got a copy of the book, and it is uncanny how my grandfather jumped out of the page, because he was writing how he was feeling, the experience he was having, how he'd got hurt with a mine hit his ship. There was another one where his ship went down and there was only 5 of them survived. And we knew none of these stories. And out of the page, my grandfather emerged. Now, I didn't really even know my grandfather. I knew him until I was about 7, you know, but, you know, and it was incredible. It was just a great example. And I said to my father, I said, God, look at, and he's crying and I'm crying, you know, but these stories, you just can't, it's a bit like one of my great musical, I also work in the musical domain. And one of my favorite bands is a Canadian band called Rush. And Neil Peart was the drummer. And he was asked, he wrote diaries all the way through his life until he died just last year. And he was asked why. And he said, the reason I do it is, he said, I can't remember what I did 30 seconds ago, never mind what I did an hour ago, or 2 hours ago, or 3 hours ago. And that's why, I mean, I've been doing an audio diary for 30 years. I've been doing a video diary for 10 years. And it's astonishing, guys. If you start to record just your day-to-day experience, something pops out. I went back and I've got the birth of my children. I've got 4 kids. They're all on there. One of them is actually the actual moment of the birth is on there. And it's not the same as you know, thinking back when you actually go back and listen to it or watch it. My brain anyway goes off like this, you know, fireworks, and I connect things better, even with my own stories. So, you know, because unless you've got some sort of clear, you know, technology-based memory, I can't remember. things either, you know, particularly at my age. Just can't remember things. So it's a great way of reliving your experiences, but I constantly use them to connect to other things that are happening in my life today. So tomorrow morning at 8:30, I'm doing a keynote in Stockholm, and I'm talking about the synchronicity between the stories that I tell and my grandfather. Where did that come from? It's fantastic. Totally true.
Sounds great. I would
Yeah.
like to hear that
I'll send you a
talk
copy.
tomorrow.
Yeah.
There's another Rush fan here, Kevin from
Hey!
New Haven.
There's
Yes.
always Rush
Would
fans.
you like
There's always
to
Rush
comment?
fans.
Why don't they ever play? Well, Time Stand Still is always
Rush,
gets me through
Rush.
a day.
There you
You
go.
know.
There you go.
Oh wow, and Maiden, and Maiden. So I'm looking at the Facebook chat right now, and we
Yeah.
have a Jim McClay from Connecting with Citizens. He says this: I think because it's your own story, you can share it with passion at times to help make it stick with people.
Lovely.
But top tip, Scott Crate, a tactical association artifact. He also asks if you have any tips for video editing, because that's something he's interested in getting into.
Right. Video editing, let me be absolutely clear. I didn't know anything about video editing 10 months ago. Nothing. So it can't be that difficult if I can do it. I've now got filmmakers telling me I'm getting good at video editing. Bizarre, right? The other thing is all the video editing software, they all claim to do this and to do that. They're basically all the same. And there's a free one called DaVinci Resolve, which some of the major filmmakers use. It's free, right? So don't be hoodwinked into thinking you have to spend a lot of money. There are ways of doing it. Now, I don't use DaVinci Resolve for a particular reason. It's to do with music. But But the other thing with editing is contemporary editing is slightly different to historical editing because of social media and our sort of our bombarding. I call it the weapons of mass distraction. You know, there's always things coming at us. Because of that, they think it's not definitive. Some people think it's definitive. It's not. The research is not clear. But short edits are everything at the moment. So I try, and if you're interested, I can send you some, or there's some on my YouTube channel. I try and make all my edits now less than a minute. And so even if I'm doing an hour-long talk, and I'm then sending out an edited version to get people to come in and watch the talk, keep it short, snappy, bang, bang, bang. And the weird thing is that in contemporary editing language, it doesn't have to be linear. It used to be always had to be linear, not anymore. You put your best bit at the beginning, even if it's incongruous with the rest of the video. So it is a different world right now, the world of film editing. It's really, really interesting. I love it. You can probably tell from my demeanor. I really like it. It's hard, it's time consuming, but it's well, at the moment, it puts you apart. You go on to YouTube, the standard is terrible. You know, you go into Twitch, if you've never heard of Twitch, Twitch is where all the gaming guys are, the best editors in the world. You see what they're doing, it's astonishing. I mean, they're all like, my eldest son is 22 and he's probably old to be on Twitch. So, you know, but these guys are, they're amazing. They're amazing. So have a look on Twitch. You'll see world-class editing with pretty boring content, unless you're a gamer. But the editing is astonishing. Astonishing.
Yeah, I can tell you're very passionate.
Thank you.
And that love and the commitment. I see that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Neasley from Los Angeles.
Hi, thank you so much, Scott. I love the passion. I love the passion. I grew up in a storytelling family. So I was born in Haiti. So we are very very African based with a flavor of French. That's what I call us as far as culture is concerned. And part of our culture was storytelling. Saturday nights we would pile up on my mom's California king size, my parents' California king size bed, and they would tell us stories about what happened in the past. And those stories as children allowed us to become very, very creative. We were not allowed to watch television. So from those stories, we created Culture Sunday. So on Sundays, we would put on different types of innovative things to entertain ourselves. So whether it was poetry or storytelling or concert or fashion show, like, but the storytelling came, so from that it made us, the bond between us and our parents, a lot stronger. And we're still telling those stories. My father was an amazing storyteller. Of course, you know, if he was bitten by a cat, the story came out that he was bitten by a lion. Whether or not there are no lions in Haiti, but he was still bitten by a lion.
Yes. Yeah. Excellent.
You know, but if a dog chased him down, it was actually a big brown bear. But you know, we were excited.
Lovely.
I want to thank you for that. I love the passion because I think when you're telling your story, and it's not trying to be tear jerkers, but when you're sharing your story, you ought to show the passion behind it.
Oh yeah.
Because you just lived it. It's a piece of you. It's like a DNA, really, of your existence.
I think that's lovely. Thank you. And you've reminded me of something that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I think you've reminded me of something else about story that I didn't mention. One of the things I also tell stories about is from my culture, because the Scottish culture is not quite as prone to storytelling as the Irish culture, for example, in the Celtic world. But nevertheless, it means that there are lots of stories that aren't told. So I also tell stories about where I came from. And I think what you've just said, I'm so jealous because we didn't do that as much in Scotland. There was a case recently, and I mean, forgive me, I'll tell a quick story because it really knocked me off my socks. I was reading about because I was a HR professional in full recovery, but I remain very interested in diversity and inclusion. I'm very interested in, you know, cross-cultural working, etc. And I had found out through an academic friend of mine about the amount of the infrastructure in Scotland that is basically built on slave money. And I got very interested in slavery in Scotland, and I started to investigate it. And something really odd happened. I came across a character, and his name, if you go in again, you go into my YouTube channel, I've written poetry about it, I've done all sorts of stuff about it. There's a Scottish slave, well, he wasn't Scottish, but he was working in Scotland, called Joseph Knight. And Joseph Knight was the first Scottish slave to be freed. And it was remarkable because what happened with Joseph was that his owner, the Wedderburn family, which are in Brightness, is up sort of towards St Andrews, Dundee direction in Scotland, they looked after him and they educated him. And he was so well educated that he was able to take them to court when he fell in love with one of the maids. And he did it 4 times. He lost 3 times. And finally, he went to Edinburgh to the Kirk of Session Court in Scotland, which was at the time was the highest court. And he won his case. So he freed himself. And I wrote a poem about how some of the statues in Edinburgh, some of the people that are on those statues actually helped him. They funded him and gave him money. It was during the Scottish Enlightenment. And I think he looks through their eyes at Scotland. And that poem was picked up by the BBC, and they are currently making, there's a brilliant Ghanaian screenwriter is writing a play about it at this moment. And I can't wait because it's such a good story. Very, very few people in Scotland know that story. I'm talking a tiny, tiny number of people know that story. It's part of our culture. No one has heard it in Scotland. Well, very few people have heard it. Google it, you'll find very little about it. You'll probably find my poem and you'll find the guy called May who's doing the play. But that to me was a great example again of how even being an archaeologist, not of your own life, but of your own country or your own culture, you can find things that you can tell the story of. And I mean, I got contacted by dozens of people about that, and they're all saying, "My goodness, I've never heard of this guy." And the best bit, honestly, I'm getting goosebumps because it was amazing, right? When he won his case, he'd spent 10 years trying to get freedom. When he won his case, do you know what he did? He took his girlfriend's hand and he disappeared. No one knows where he went. He just said, "Thank you." This man had an enormous level of integrity, you know, and is totally opposite to the culture that we operate in today, where everybody wants to be famous. Not Joseph. He spent 10 years fighting his case. He won his case and he disappeared. I love that. I love it. You know, and again, if you, I'm not very good at poetry, but if you look at my YouTube channel, you'll see my poetry's on there, and you'll listen to it. It's quite narrative based, so it'll give you an idea of the fuller story. But it's an extraordinary story. So be an archaeologist of your own culture, and your example from Haiti is better than mine. But certainly, if you're from Scotland or England, there's a huge opportunity. Not all Scottish people believe in the Loch Ness monster and jump around with red hair, listening to Robbie Burns. You know, there's a whole richer, deeper culture in Scotland that people don't talk about, and it's there for the picking in my culture.
Thank you,
Scott. That was a long answer, sorry.
It's a great story. And
it's a good story.
Keith asks here in the chat, how do you decide which is going to be the artifact you will use? I mean, how do you know which will be the right one that will be the connection? Is
right.
that knowing your audience?
It's kind of knowing your audience, and also having one of the things. Was it Keith that asked that question? Was it Keith?
Yes.
Yeah, Keith. One of the things that I also, this is not to do with storytelling, it's more to do with public speaking. If you want to be a speaker, and I'm not saying you want to be a speaker, but if you want to be a speaker, there's only one thing you need to do, and that is speak. And that sounds really obvious, but in 2019, I wanted to be a professional speaker. So I did a British pub tour. I spoke in 30 pubs from Aberdeen to Portsmouth. I spoke when there was 200 drunk people at a hen party. I spoke when there was 5 people in the room. I practiced my stories. I got up, I got my artifacts, I showed them the artifact. I said, "What do you think?" And they gave me feedback. So I got feedback from people who were in the audience. Obviously they were drinking and they were telling you the truth. Because if you ask corporate people, they're not quite as truthful most of the time. But certainly in that environment, that's where I tested my artifacts. The other thing is like this poison bottle. I won't tell you the story, but this is a poison bottle. And I used to have this little poison bottle.
What is that?
But no one could see it. So I had to buy a big one so they could see it when I was on camera. So it was little things like that. You know, just think about, you know, the audience, as Marcus suggested. And if the audience can't see it, it's not going to work. So you somehow have to, you know, make it bigger than it actually is. So that's why. And I use, like, I've got a Dementor there from Harry Potter. I use that to talk about people who suck the energy out of a conversation. I've got a skull there, which is about memento mori, how short is life. You know, and then the other thing I always have behind me, and I did it for today, is I also select references for the audience. See these books? These are the best books. Well, that's my master's degree, but the rest of them are the best books in the market about storytelling. And I very rarely mention it, but you know what? When people watch my videos, they go, "I spotted that book on." So I'm always thinking about cues. So people they will remember. I normally don't have headphones on. I don't like this, but on my normal studio, they will remember not only my Scottish accent and my passion, but they will think, "What was that book?" And they come back and they say, "Scott, I couldn't quite," and they ask me a question, and it creates a dialogue. And whenever I do a speech, I get 2 or 3 more speeches as a consequence. That's my marketing strategy. It's as simple as that, because they remember the passion. They just remember it, you know. And if you've got an artifact, the cuddly Scotsman's fine, but the cuddly Scotsman with the elephant story, I remember him. Another long answer, but that is what I do. That's how I do it.
Yeah, let's follow our passion and beware. The next one is a Scottish question coming from Michael McEwen. Michael, please.
Hi, Michael.
All right, Scott.
How you doing?
Sorry, that was yeah. So I love your passion for storytelling and stuff. I can relate to some of it because I'm a kind of like freelance journalist as well. But like what I would like to say was it's not really maybe a question, but if anybody's like watching this on Facebook or on Zoom for now, what would you say to them about if they were going to think about doing a podcast once a month, but they're not quite kind of sure about it?
Brilliant question, mate. Thank you very much. Typical Scotsman giving me a good question. Thank you. Not biased at all. I remember. Can I tell another story? What time is it? I don't know what time it is. I'm not in my usual studio here.
Please do. We have 10 minutes left.
10 minutes, right. When I was in the laboratories, my professor one day called me and he said, I've got a job for you. I was like, right. He said, I want you to teach college and chemistry to year 3 medics. Now I was like, I knew my college and chemistry, that was my job. I kind of understood that, but I'd never taught, I'd never been on my feet, I'd never done anything like that in my life. So, but he was not the sort of professor you could say no to. You know, he was quite a powerful man. And just to be clear, in the United Kingdom, a professor isn't just a university teacher, it's a very, very senior university teacher. It takes 20, 30 years to become a professor in most cases in the United Kingdom. So it's hard. And he was the top guy. He was in charge of the Lockerbie investigation. So I went and did an 8-week course on college and chemistry to medics, and I was an absolute disaster. Honestly, I had long hair, you know, probably clues from Iron Maiden and Rush. I had long hair and I would come out with my lab coat and I was always wet and uncomfortable. And at the end of the 8 weeks, his name was Dougal Gardner, Professor Dougal Gardner. And Dougal, I didn't call him Dougal at the time, I called him Sir. Dougal called me into his office and he said, how did you get on? And I was like, I thought he was going to let me go. I thought he was going to sack me. I thought he was going to terminate my contract. And I was extremely worried about this meeting. And he looked at me and he got his glasses like this and he went, give yourself a grade, A to F. And I was like, so I said, F. I was terrible. It was a fail. Sorry, I don't want to ever do it again. And I really thought he was going to sack me. And he did it again. He said, can I give you a grade? And I was like, oh, here we go. And he said, I'm going to give you this grade. I'm going to give you a not yet. And I was like, what? I better not swear. What the F does that mean? And if we had more time, I would ask you what you think. But what he meant was, I saw something in you that I think you should develop that. And 20 years later, I did my first TEDx talk, the biggest one in Europe. It's got 3,500 people at it, and it went really well. I contacted Dougal, as he was then, because he became my friend. I invited him, but he couldn't come because he was in his 90s. He was 93, and he said, "But what you can do is send me the video, and then maybe come and see me." So I did. I sent him the video, and then I travelled up to Edinburgh. At the time, he was the president of the Royal College of Surgeons in a building called the Surgeons Hall in Edinburgh. And we went for lunch, walked into the room. His son David was there and took us to where Dougal was sitting. We sat down, 93, right? He leant forward and went, give yourself a grade. So I just went, no, I'm not doing that. He said, well, I'm going to give you a grade. And he said, I'll give you an A. And I was like, yes, like my kids, you know, when you get yes, even though I was in my 40s, you know, it's ridiculous. Yes. But he did it again. Went for it and he leant and he went, but, right? And it gave me goosebumps at the time. It's giving me goosebumps now. But to answer your question, I think like what he taught me that you don't have to get it right. You just have to get it done. Right. And 9 months ago, I started vlogging on YouTube. I was absolutely crap. Right. All my other fellow speakers, nearly them all. I mean, there's only 400 in the UK. I know nearly all of them. Yeah. Nearly all of them are still talking about starting vlogging. And I've done 200 hours of live broadcasting and vlogging, and I'm getting better every day, right? So don't get it right, get it done. So if you have an idea for a podcast, go for it. Just go for it. Because the other thing that's really interesting is people are very forgiving, particularly at the moment. You don't need to be perfect. I'm not. I mean, you know, I'll use an and an ah here and there, and I'll over talk sometimes, or I'll under talk, or I'll get a cut wrong. Or I did a video yesterday where I had the focus slightly wrong. The client loves it, right? You don't need to get it right. You just need to get it done. So for me, I would strongly advise anybody that's got an idea, just do it, because that's what Dougal did with me. Just do it and get it done. And just the naysayers, yeah, if they're good naysayers and they're giving you good advice, yes, listen to them. But listen to yourself. If you think you can do it, just do it. You just have to watch some of the best, like, who's a good example? Have you heard of Christa Tippett and her show On Being? Maybe not, right? Christa Tippett. Now, I'm an atheist, but I'm very interested in faith stories and particularly interested in fables. And Christa Tippett is a theologian, and she runs I think it's the best podcast in the world, and it's called On Being. And if you listen to her early shows, she was terrible. She's now earning millions of dollars. She's one of the most respected podcasters in the world, and her storytelling, it's just off the scale how good she is. She started, and she wasn't very good. There's another young lady. It's International Women's Day after all. There's a website called Brain Pickings. Have you ever heard of Brain Pickings, with a young lady called Maria Popova from Bulgaria? She started that website before she could speak English. And she's now basically one of the top literary sources on the planet. And she started it as a newsletter before she could speak English properly. So you don't have to be big, you don't have to be good at it. You just have to have an idea and get on with it. Another long answer, but that I genuinely believe that, you know, it's almost like American nonsense, like feel the fear and get on with it. Yeah, feel the fear and get on the stage and do it.
Thank you so much, Scott.
Yeah.
The time is almost the full hour, but here we have comments from Silent Suki. I love how you shared your background, Scott. I find the book Storytelling Made Easy by Michael Haug great.
Yeah.
What's your website URL?
Well, the best thing to do, thank you for asking the question, it's a very good book. It's one of the ones I would recommend as well. The other one would be Will Storr's book, The Science of Storytelling. Will Storr, fantastic, another journalist incidentally, but it's a very, very good book. The best way to find me, there's two ways. One is to use the hashtag across the socials, Artifact Live, one word, Artifact Live. That's my show that I do on a Tuesday morning at 11:30 UK time. Marcus was the guest last week. The other way is the hashtag Scott Speaks. That's my hashtag. It's all over the place. And if you want to see any of my material specifically, youtube.com/Scott McArthur. That's my YouTube channel. There's about 300 videos on there, so there's quite a lot on there. You can binge it if you like.
Thanks, Scott. Alistair has here a comment. Don't wait for the right time. The right time is now. And the time is now 2 to the full hour. So we would like to thank Scott for this wonderful hour together on the No Labels, No Walls Action Monday. And Michael Bierman from Los Angeles will present what is happening next week.
Yes. Mehdi, if you want to put the sound off. Is there echoing? Yeah. One second. Let me go in the other room. Mehdi, can you announce the other one? Oh, you got it? Okay. Hi. So yes, every next week we have Susie Tanner from Theater Workers Project, who's actually on the call today, talking about her work inside prisons in the state of California through theater and the arts. So we're really excited to have Susie and Theater Workers Project. And yeah, and then I just like to thank Cindy for being the host. Thank you so much, Cindy. And Cindy, who's going to be the host for next week?
Oh yeah, it's only fair that I get to warn somebody. Let's see, who hasn't done it for a while? Rika, you're new. Would you like to come next week and be the host?
Thank you. I'm not sure if I can make it because I have my own webinar. I have to check my calendar, so maybe I'll pass this time.
Okay.
But we hope someday I will.
Okay, fair enough. How about Keith? Have you done it for a while?
What, me?
Yeah, you.
Yeah, no, I haven't done it for a while. Actually, I think I was supposed to do it this week, but
Okay. Well, it's your turn next week then, if you have time.
Mark said identified me last week, but then when I came on, you were already doing it, so I thought that's lovely.
Yeah, Mark, Keith, they sound alike. Cindy, they're all the same. Okay, would you like to do it next week then?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Good. All right. Thank you.
Perfect. So everyone,
Here's my
please
little
join
hug.
in for next week. It's going to be great.
Michael?
Yes?
You were talking a bit too fast. What
Oh,
was it
sorry.
about
Next week is, yes, next week is Theater Workers Project with Susie Tanner presenting her work inside prisons, doing theater in prisons and videos.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Leila. And we all can watch this later from Citizen Network TV. So subscribe today and you will join hundreds of wonderful videos coming soon. Thank you, Scott, again, and see you next week. Same time, same place.